My husband slid the divorce papers across the kitchen table I had scrubbed for 34 years, smiled like a man closing a good deal, and said, "You'll be nothing without me, Eleanor. At 61, you've got no skills, no name, nothing." I did not cry. I looked at the pen he had set on top of the folder, a heavy silver pen I had given him for our 20th anniversary, and I thought about how long it had been since he gave me anything at all. His name is Marcus Hayes. For 34 years I answered to Mrs. Hayes and let the world believe that the only thing I had ever built was a clean house and a quiet life. Because that was the story Marcus told. And I had grown very tired of correcting him. What Marcus did not know, sitting there so pleased with himself, was that the small catering kitchen I ran on the side, the one he called my little hobby, had already started to grow into something he could not see and could never take. And within 2 years, it would be worth more than everything his name was on combined. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. Because I think some of you already know this feeling in your bones. Have you ever been told you are nothing by the very person who built their whole comfortable life on top of you? If you have, stay with me and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Because I think we are going to understand each other. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and I was 61 years old the morning my marriage ended on a Tuesday. And I want to tell you the whole of it, the way it actually happened, not the way Marcus has told people since. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the cinnamon I had been grinding for a tray of rolls due across town by 10. I had been awake since 4. That part nobody ever counted. While Marcus slept, I was already 3 hours into a day, peeling, folding, labeling, loading. By the time he came down in his good gray suit, I had finished an order for the Whitman's anniversary brunch and started a second for a church women's luncheon. And the counter was a clean assembly line of foil pans with my handwriting on every lid. He stood in the doorway with the folder under his arm and watched me work the way a man watches a television he is about to turn off. "You're up early," he said, and there was no warmth in it. Only the flat patience of a man waiting for the right moment to set something down. "Orders," I said. "The Whitmans, and then Mount Pleasant at noon." He set the folder on the table, exactly where my Bible usually sat for my morning verse, and I noticed that. I noticed small placements. 34 years of a household teaches you that nothing a man does at a table is an accident. "We need to talk," he said. I dried my hands on the towel at my waist, and I sat. Because I had learned long ago that standing makes a man feel like he has to win. And I did not want to give Marcus a fight that morning. I wanted to deliver my orders on time. That is the truth that has carried me my whole life. Even at the end of my marriage, I was thinking about getting the rolls there warm. "I want a divorce," he said. He said it the way he announced he was switching banks. Final, administrative, already done in his head. I did not answer right away. I let the kitchen be quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the street a school bus hissed its brakes. "Did you hear me?" he said. And there was the first crack of irritation, because Marcus needed a reaction to feel real. "I heard you," I said. He opened the folder and turned it to face me and slid it across the table. And that is when he said it, the sentence that ended one life and started another. "You'll be nothing without me, Eleanor. You're 61 years old with no degree, no career, nothing to your name. You've never even held a real job." I looked down at the papers. Petition for dissolution of marriage. My name, Eleanor Grace Hayes, typed in a box. His name beside it. And below, a list of what he called the marital assets. The house we sat in, the rental duplex over on Calhoun Street, his retirement account from the insurance firm where he sold policies for 30 years, 2 cars, a boat I had been on exactly 4 times. Nowhere on that list was the catering kitchen. Nowhere on that list was the small company I had quietly registered 18 months before, under a name that was mine alone, in an account he had never once looked at, because he believed my work was too small to matter. That was the mistake, not the cruelty. Men are cruel all the time, and the world keeps turning. The mistake was that Marcus had spent 34 years not looking, and a person who does not look cannot see what is growing right under his hands. "Sign by the colored tabs," he said. "My lawyer says it's clean. The house is mine." I paid the note. "You can keep your kitchen things." I looked up at him then, really looked, and I asked him one question, the only question I asked him that whole morning. I said, 34 years, Marcus. Is that really all you think I'm worth?" And he had the chance, in that second, to say something human. And instead, he gave a small laugh and spread his hands and said, "Eleanor, I'm being generous. Most men would leave you with nothing at all. I'm letting you keep the ovens." And he checked his watch. Because he had a meeting, because even ending a marriage was something he scheduled around his day. Keep my kitchen things. As if the convection oven I'd financed myself, the proofing cabinet, the 3-bay sink I had installed in the garage with my own savings, were a consolation prize he was generously letting me carry out. I closed the folder. I did not sign. "I'll have my lawyer call yours," I said. He laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised and a little delighted, the laugh of a man who finds it adorable that the dog has growled. "Your lawyer," he repeated. "Eleanor, you don't have a lawyer. You don't have anything. That's the whole point." I stood up, picked up my towel, and went back to my rolls, because Mount Pleasant was at noon and the icing needed to set. Behind me, I heard him gather the folder, mutter something about being reasonable, and leave for the office. The front door closed. His car backed out. And I stood at my own counter, 61 years old. A woman he had just told was nothing. And I piped a perfect spiral of cream cheese icing onto a warm roll, and my hand did not shake. That steadiness is not a small thing, and it did not come from him. It came from a life he never bothered to ask about. I was 27 when I met Marcus Hayes, and I was already somebody. People forget that part, and for a long time, I let them, including myself. At 27, I was the assistant pastry baker at a hotel downtown, the Carlisle, the kind of place where senators ate breakfast, and the kitchen ran like a Navy ship. My grandmother had raised me in a kitchen that smelled of yeast and brown sugar from before I could see over the counter. And by the time I was a young woman, I could feel when a dough was right by the give of it under my palm, the way some people can feel rain coming in their knees. The head pastry chef at the Carlisle was a hard Frenchman named Robideau, who made grown men cry over a fallen soufflé. And he told me one slow afternoon, with flour to his elbows, that I had the best hands he had seen in 20 years and that I should have my own place by 40. Marcus came into my life through the side door of all that. He sold an insurance policy to the hotel. He saw me through the kitchen window, plating a dessert for a banquet. And he came back 3 days in a row to buy coffee he did not drink so he could watch me work. He was handsome in a careful way. Good suit, good teeth, a salesman's gift for making you feel like the only lit window on a dark street. I remember the exact afternoon he first spoke to me, because I have turned it over so many times since. I was carrying a tray of cooling tart shells out to the service line, and he was standing by the host stand in a navy suit. And he stepped into my path. Not rudely, just enough. And he said, You're the one who makes the desserts. I've been watching you, I said. You've been buying a lot of coffee you don't drink. And he laughed, surprised, the way men laugh when a woman they have decided is shy turns out to have a tongue. And he said, "You caught me." I just couldn't figure out how to talk to a woman who never looks up from her work. And I said, the truest thing I could have told him, and the thing he spent 34 years making me forget. I look up when there's a reason to. I went back to my tart shells. He sent flowers to the kitchen the next day, which is against every rule a hotel kitchen has. And Robideau held the vase over the trash and looked at me and said in his hard accent, "This man wants you to stop, Eleanor. They always want you to stop." And I laughed because I was 27 and in love with being wanted, and I did not hear the warning in it. And I have thought about that vase over the trash can more times than I can count. When Marcus asked me to dinner, I said yes. And the dinner was at a restaurant nicer than any I had eaten in. And he ordered for both of us without asking. And I told myself that was confidence and not a sign. When he asked me to marry him 8 months later, he did it at that same restaurant, on one knee by the table, and the whole room clapped. And I said yes through tears, and it was, I will not lie to you, one of the happy nights of my life. And the happiness was real, even though the man was not what I thought. It was after the wedding that the first door closed, so quietly I did not hear the latch. We were 3 weeks married, and I came home from a double shift at the Carlisle at 1 in the morning, smelling of caramel and exhausted and lit up the way only good hard work lights you. And Marcus was awake, sitting at our little table, and he did not ask how my night had gone. He said, "Eleanor, I've been thinking. A married woman of standing doesn't need to be on her feet in a hotel kitchen until midnight. People will think I can't provide." And he reached across the table and took both my hands in his, gently, and turned them palm up, and looked at the burns and the calluses and the flour worked permanently into the creases. And he said, "These are working hands. You don't have to have working hands anymore. Let me take care of you." And I believed that he was protecting something precious. And the next week I gave Robideau my notice. And the old Frenchman did not argue. He only looked at me a long time and said, "A pity. The best hands I have had in 20 years, and a man wants them folded in a lap. Come back when he lets you." And I quit. And I did not come back. Not for 34 years. I want to be honest with you. Because this is not a story about a perfect woman who was wronged by a wicked man and never made a misstep. I made the misstep. I handed him my hands. Robideau had called them the finest pair of hands to come through his kitchen in a generation. And I folded them in my lap because a man told me it would be more dignified. And I called that love. Year after year, for the whole length of that marriage, I baked only for free. For church, for school fundraisers, for the firm's holiday parties, where Marcus's colleagues praised the desserts and Marcus said, "My wife dabbles," and steered the conversation back to golf. I baked for our son. I baked for funerals and baby showers and the long, ordinary Sundays that make up a life. And I never once charged $1. Because Marcus said charging would make us look like we needed the money. And looking like we needed money was the one sin in his religion. There was a Christmas, and the year I turned 40, that I want you to see. The firm threw its holiday party at a hotel ballroom, and I spent 2 days making the desserts, a croquant bouche, a tower of cream puffs glazed with spun sugar. The kind of thing Robideau had taught me. The kind of thing that takes hands like mine and patience like mine, and that almost nobody does anymore. I built it on the kitchen counter and drove it across town in the back seat with a seatbelt around the platter. At the party, a senior partner's wife stood in front of it with her hand on her chest and said, "Who in the world did this? It belongs in a magazine." And before I could open my mouth, Marcus put his arm around me and said, smiling, "Oh, Eleanor likes to keep busy. Keeps her out of trouble." And everyone laughed, warmly. And the woman patted my arm and said how lucky I was to have such a nice hobby. And the conversation moved on. And I stood next to a tower of spun sugar I had built with hands a hard old Frenchman had once called the best he had trained in all his years on a line. And I was a woman who liked to keep busy. I did not correct him. I never corrected him. That was my part in it, and I have owned my part for a long time now. There was one chance I let go that I think about more than any other. And I will tell it because the forensic truth of a sacrifice is the only way you understand what was taken. When Andre was about 12, Robideau, my old chef, retired from the Carlisle and opened a small pastry shop of his own across the city. And he tracked me down, called the house one afternoon, and his hard old voice on the phone said, "Eleanor, I am old, and my hands are slow, and I need a partner with good hands and a head for it. Come run the kitchen with me. Half the shop is yours. I have waited years to ask you." It was everything. It was the life I had folded into my lap handed back to me on a plate. I told Marcus that night, glowing the way I would glow again decades later about Otis's wedding. And Marcus set down his fork and gave me the patient look and said, "And who raises Andre while you're across town in a bakery 60 hours a week? Who keeps this house? Eleanor, we don't need the money, and we don't need the talk. Robideau's a sweet old man, but this is a fantasy." And I called Robideau back the next day, and I told him no. And there was a silence on the line. And then he said gently, the second time he had said a version of it, "A pity. Come back when he lets you." He died 8 years later. The shop sold to strangers, and I never did go back. And when I finally opened my own kitchen, it was too late to tell him. And that is the one grief in this whole story that the empire could not repay. I built it partly for him. I think he would have tasted my cornbread and said, in that hard voice, "Finally. The hands. I told you." The put-downs were almost never loud. That is what I want people to understand, because they imagine a man shouting, and Marcus rarely raised his voice. It was 1,000 small placements, the way he placed that folder where my Bible went. When I read a book about running a small business, I left it on the nightstand, and he picked it up, looked at the cover, and set it down with a little smile and said, "Planning to open a shop, are we?" And that smile did more than a shout. When I mentioned once that I'd been thinking of taking a cake decorating certification at the community college, just for myself, he said, "At your age?" And then, seeing my face, "You don't need a certificate to make a pretty cake for the church, honey. You already do that." That was the trick of it. He could make even encouragement into offense. "You already do that. For free. For us. For the church. Stay there. Our son is named Andre. Andre Hayes. He was the joy of my life, and for a long stretch I am not proud of. The rope Marcus used to keep me tied to the dock. When Andre was small, I poured everything into him. His lunches, his science fair volcanoes, the readings I drilled before spelling tests. Marcus traveled for the firm and came home to a clean boy and a hot supper and took the credit for a family he barely steered. I remember a night when Andre was maybe 9, sick with a fever, and Marcus was in Atlanta. And I sat up with my boy until 3 in the morning, sponging his forehead and reading him the same chapter of a book over and over, because it was the one that soothed him. And in the morning, the fever broke. And that afternoon, Marcus called from his hotel, and Andre, propped up on the couch, told him, "Daddy, I was so sick." And Marcus said something, and Andre listened. And then Andre said to me, "Hand over the phone. Daddy says I'm a tough Hayes man, and I get that from him." And I smiled at my son and said, "You sure do, baby." And I did not say, I was the one here at 3 in the morning. I have given Marcus the credit for so many 3 in the mornings that I lost count. And I gave them freely, because I thought that was what a good mother did. Hand the father the medal and keep the long night for herself. When Andre got his college acceptance, it was me who had sat with him through every essay draft, me who had quizzed him for the entrance exams at the kitchen table while a roast cooked. And when the letter came, Marcus took him out to a steakhouse, just the two of them, a men's celebration, and brought him home glowing, and I had a cake waiting that I had made and decorated with the school's colors. And Andre hugged me and said it was the best day. And then he and his father talked late into the night about fraternities and football while I washed the cake plates. I do not tell you this to make my son sound cruel. He was a boy, and then a young man, raised inside a story that said his mother was the soft furniture of the house, always there, requiring nothing, noticing nothing, and a child believes the story he is raised inside. He could not have known what he was standing on. None of them could, because the woman holding it all up never once set it down to show them the strain. By the time Andre was grown and gone to a good job 2 states away, married to Camille, careful, a little distant, the habit of disappearing for other people was so deep in me that I no longer felt it as a wound. It just felt like air. I would call him and he would be busy, and I would say, "Of course, baby, call me when you can." And weeks would go by. And I told myself this was simply how grown sons were. And I baked for an empty house, and I drove the desserts to church. And somewhere in there I had become exactly the woman Marcus had built me to be. A pair of working hands that asked for nothing and were thanked for less. The kitchen started by accident, the way most true things in my life have started. 3 years before that Tuesday, our church lost its longtime caterer, a sweet woman named Miss Verla, who finally retired at 81. And the deacons were in a panic about the spring banquet, 400 plates, no kitchen, 3 weeks out. I was in the fellowship hall folding programs when I heard them at the long table, 3 deacons and the pastor's wife, going down a list of catering companies and reading off prices and shaking their heads. $8,000, one of them said, for 400 plates of food at a church banquet. And another said, "Miss Verla did it for the cost of the groceries. God bless her, and now what do we do?" I heard my own voice before I had decided anything. I said, across the hall, "I can do it." They all turned. Deacon Willis, a kind, heavy man who had known me 20 years, said, "Sister Eleanor?" And I walked over, still holding a half-folded program, and I said, "I can do the banquet. 400 plates. I'll do it for the cost of the groceries, the way Verla did. And it'll be better than anything on that list." And there was a silence. The particular silence of people who like you very much and have never once thought of you as someone who could feed 400. The pastor's wife said gently, "Honey, that is a lot of food. Have you ever cooked at that scale?" And I looked at her, and something straightened up in my spine, something that had been bent over for 30 years. And I said, "I cooked for senators at the Carlisle Hotel before I was married. I have done banquets for 600. 400 is a Tuesday. Let me do this for my church." Deacon Willis looked at the others, and then he looked at me, and he said, "Well, all right then, the kitchen's yours." I did it out of my own garage and the church's borrowed kitchen, 400 plates, glazed ham and cornbread dressing and yeast rolls, and 3 kinds of cobbler, peach and blackberry, and a sweet potato one that was my grandmother's. And I ran that 2-day cook like Robideau had run his line, every pan labeled, every timing written on a board, and it went out hot and on time, and not one plate was short. And while people were going back for thirds, a man I had never met came and found me at the 3-bay sink in the church kitchen, scraping pans, a big weathered man in clean work clothes. And he said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you. I came as Sister Coleman's guest. I just had to know who made that food." And I said, I did. And he stuck out a hand the size of a dinner plate and said, "Otis Freeman." "Ma'am, that was the best banquet food I have ever put in my mouth, and my men eat for a living, so I know food." He told me he ran a construction outfit, 40 men on a job site across the river, and that his foreman fed them gas station sandwiches and lukewarm pizza, and that morale was in the dirt. And he said, half joking and half not, "I'd pay good money to feed my crew like this. You don't, by any chance, cook for hire?" I said I would have to think about it. I went home and told Marcus there was a man who wanted to pay me to cook, real money, every week. And Marcus looked up from the television and said, "And do what? Run a lunch truck?" "Eleanor, please, you'd embarrass us." He said it gently, the way you correct a child. And then he went back to his program. That was the night something in me, very quiet, very old, sat up and decided to stop asking permission. I called Otis Freeman the next morning, from the garage, with the door pulled down so Marcus would not hear. And I told him I would do it. 40 lunches, 3 days a week, hot and delivered. And I named a price that I thought was fair, and that was, I realize now, about half what I should have charged, because 30 years of being told that asking for money was shameful does not leave you all at once. Otis said the price was a steal, and that he would have his foreman bring me the head count every Monday. And then he said something that I carried home like a warm coal. He said, "Mrs. Hayes," my daddy always told me, "you find a person who's good at a thing and undercharging for it, you treat them right, and you keep them forever. You raise that price next month, and I'll still be glad to pay it." I did not tell Marcus any of it. I cooked for 40 men out of my garage 3 days a week, then 4, then 5 as the head count grew. And the first morning the foreman handed me an envelope of cash for the week, I sat in my parked car in the lot of the job site and counted it twice. And it was more than I had held in my own hand. Money that was only mine, in longer than I could remember. And I did not feel guilty. I drove to the bank, not our bank, a credit union across town where Marcus knew no one, and I opened an account in my name only. And the young teller asked what the account was for. And I said, after a pause that surprised me, "My business." And it was the first time I had ever said those 2 words out loud, my business, and they felt like a key turning. I bought the convection oven with the first 8 weeks of pay, and had it delivered while Marcus was on a sales trip and put it in the garage. And when he came home and noticed it, he frowned and said, "Where did that come from?" And I said, "It's been on a layaway plan for ages. You just never noticed me paying it off." And that was a lie, the first real lie of my marriage. And he accepted it instantly, because the lie fit his picture of me, a woman puttering with kitchen toys. And the truth would not have fit at all. I have made my peace with that lie. I needed the cover of his low opinion, and he gave it to me for free, the way he gave me so little else. Otis's crew told another crew. Word on a job site travels faster than word at church, and it travels with respect, because a working man who has eaten gas station sandwiches for a year and then eats my pot roast and cornbread becomes, very quickly, an evangelist. Within a year, I was cooking for 3 crews and a small machine shop. And I had hired a young woman named Renata, a single mother who had been waiting tables and needed steady daytime hours. And she had quick hands and a quicker mind, and she learned my systems in a week. And I had registered a business name, because Otis's bookkeeper had called and said sweetly, "Hon, I can't keep cutting checks to a person. I need a business to pay. Do you have a name and a tax number?" And so one night, after Marcus had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the forms spread out under the low light, and where it asked for the name of the company, I almost wrote Hayes Catering, my married name, his name. And then my pen stopped over the line, and I sat there a long time in the quiet house, and I wrote a different name. I named it after my grandmother. Pearl. Pearl's Table. Pearl Mabry was the woman who taught me to feel a dough, and her name had never been on anything but a small flat headstone, and I wanted it on something that fed people. So the company was Pearl's Table, and on every form, every license, every bank line, the owner was Eleanor Grace Hayes, sole proprietor, and Marcus's name was nowhere, because Marcus had said it would embarrass us, and I had finally, after 34 years, decided to take him at his word. I remember the night I first realized I had passed him. It was about a year before the papers. I was at the kitchen table after Marcus had gone to bed, doing the month's books in my green ledger by the low light. And I added up the profit, the real profit, after groceries and gas and Renata's pay. And I sat back and looked at the number. And then I did a thing I am a little ashamed of and a little proud of. I knew roughly what Marcus's commission check had been that month, because I had seen the deposit slip he left on the dresser. And I held the two numbers in my mind, side by side, his and mine. And mine was bigger. Mine was bigger. And he did not know. And I had built it out of a garage at 4 a.m. while he slept down the hall. And I sat in the dark kitchen with that knowledge like a warm stone in my hand. And I did not tell him. I could have. I almost did, more than once. But every time I had tried to tell that man anything about my work for 34 years, he had changed the channel. And a woman learns eventually to stop offering the truth to someone who has made a career of refusing it. I tell you all of this so that when I say Marcus had no idea what he was sitting across from that Tuesday morning, you understand it completely. He thought he was divorcing a housewife. He was divorcing a woman who had quietly out-earned him for a year and was only just getting started, and who had kept that fact to herself, not out of cunning, but out of the long exhaustion of being unheard. There is one more scene from those years I have to give you, because it is the hinge of everything. The night I stopped asking permission, and I told it too fast before. I came in from the garage one evening, 2 years before the papers, smelling of the day's cooking, and I was lit up. Because Otis had asked me that afternoon to cater his daughter's wedding, a real event. 200 guests, a paying job bigger than anything I had done since the Carlisle, and I was so happy I forgot myself. And at supper I told Marcus. I said, "Otis Freeman asked me to cater his daughter's wedding. 200 people. He's paying me well for it." And Marcus put down his fork and looked at me with a patience that was its own kind of contempt and said, "Eleanor, listen to yourself. You're 60 years old. You're going to be hauling chafing dishes around a wedding like the help? What are people going to say that Marcus Hayes can't keep his wife out of a catering apron?" And I said quietly, "People are going to say the food was wonderful." And he sighed, the long sigh of a man burdened by an unreasonable woman. And he said the sentence that, looking back, was the beginning of the end. 2 years before the end. He said, "You'd be nothing without me to keep you respectable. You know that? Out there you're a cook. In here you're Mrs. Hayes. I'd think you'd be grateful for the difference." I did not answer him. I got up and cleared the plates. But something very old and very quiet sat up inside me that night and decided, without drama, without a single raised voice, that it was done asking this man for permission to exist. I catered Otis's daughter's wedding. It was beautiful. The bride cried over the cake, and I never told Marcus how it went, and he never asked. And that silence between his question 2 years early and the day he handed me the papers is the room in which I built everything. The day my marriage ended on that kitchen table, I delivered my rolls to Mount Pleasant warm and on time. And Sister Coleman met me at the door and said the church ladies just loved my rolls. And I smiled and said thank you. And I did not tell her that 2 hours earlier my husband had told me I was nothing. Then I drove to a strip mall office I had never been to before, and I hired a lawyer. Her name was Adeze Okafor, a sharp young woman with a corner office the size of a closet and a handshake like a door closing. I had gotten her name from Renata, whose cousin she had helped through a hard custody case. I sat in the one client chair and I put Marcus's folder on her desk and I said, "My husband filed for divorce this morning. He told me I'd be nothing without him. I'd like to know exactly what I'm entitled to and exactly what's mine." She read the petition with a pen, moving down the margin. She asked good questions, fast. How long married? Whose name on the house? Whose name on the duplex? His retirement, vested or not? Any business interests? I have a business, I said. She looked up. It's called Pearl's Table, catering. I started it about 3 years ago. I'm the sole owner. He thinks it's a hobby. What does it bring in? She asked. I told her I had brought the numbers, 3 years of them, in a green ledger I kept in the proofing cabinet where Marcus never looked, and a folder of bank statements from an account at a credit union across town that he did not know existed. Adaz went still in the way smart people go still when they realize the game is not the game they were told. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, and she put her pen down. "Does your husband know any of this?" "He knows I cook for some construction crews," I said. "He does not know the numbers. He has never asked." She leaned back. "He filed first," she said, almost to herself. "He filed first because he thinks he's the one with assets to protect. And he didn't list the business because, as far as he's concerned, it doesn't exist." "Is that good or bad?" I asked. "It's complicated," she said. "In this state, what you built during the marriage is generally marital property, even in your name alone. He could come after a piece of Pearl's Table, but," and she tapped the petition, "he has to know it exists to claim it. And right now he's swearing under oath that his list is complete. If he certifies that list without disclosing your business, and we don't volunteer it, and it later comes out that he hid assets too, then we are in a very different conversation. So I need to ask you something, and I need a true answer. Are there things on his side you don't know about? I thought about the boat I'd been on 4 times. I thought about a trip to Atlanta he took twice a year for a sales conference that I had begun in the last year to wonder about. I thought about how a man who lies to his wife about her worth might be lying about other things too. I don't know, I said. But I think it's time somebody looked. Then we look, she said. Both sides. Full financial disclosure. He wanted a clean, fast divorce, where he keeps the house and you take your kitchen things and disappear. He's about to get a real one. I left her office, and I sat in my car in the strip mall parking lot for a long time. I was not triumphant. I want to be clear about that, because the people who tell this story for me later make me sound like a woman sharpening a knife, and I was not. I was a 61-year-old woman who had just been told she was nothing. sitting in a hot car, holding a green ledger with 3 years of 4 o'clock mornings in it. And what I felt was not vengeance. It was something quieter and harder. It was the feeling of finally being allowed to know my own size. That Sunday, the first Sunday after the papers, I went to church the way I had every Sunday of my married life. And I sat in my usual pew, and somewhere in the middle of the service, while the choir sang an old hymn my grandmother used to hum over a bowl of dough, something in me let go, very quietly. No sobbing, just a long breath out. The kind of breath you do not know you have been holding for 34 years. I did not pray for Marcus to suffer. I want you to know that. I prayed a strange, simple prayer that surprised me as it came. I said, "Thank you. Thank you for the hands." I had spent so long believing those hands belonged to a marriage, to a church potluck, to everybody but me. And sitting in that pew, I understood, the way you understand a thing in your body before your mind catches up, that they had always been mine, given to me before Marcus, and they would be mine after him. And that was enough to build a whole second life on. I came out of that service lighter than I had gone in, and I drove past the commissary by the river, which I had not yet leased. And I sat in the parking lot and looked at the empty building for a long time. And I could see it already. The sign, the vans, the steam. I just had not signed the lease yet. I called Renata the next morning and told her we were going to take on more work. She said, "How much more?" I said, "As much as comes. We're going to build this thing for real now." And we did. I need to slow down here and tell you about the building, because the title of my own story tells you he said I'd be nothing, and the title promises you an empire. And I do not want you to think it appeared like a miracle. It did not. It came one job, one hire, one early morning at a time. And the man who said I'd be nothing got to watch it happen across the divorce that was supposed to bury me. The first thing that changed was that I stopped working out of a garage. There was an old commissary kitchen for lease near the river, a place that had been a barbecue joint and then a meal prep company that went under, with a walk-in cooler and 4 range hoods and a loading dock. And it was more square footage than I had any business renting. The landlord was a careful older man named Mr. Petrakis, who had been burned by the meal prep tenant and was wary of anyone in the food business. And when I called about the space, he was polite and plainly skeptical. And when I arrived to see it, he looked at me, a woman of 61 in a Sunday dress, and I watched him decide I was wasting his time. He wanted $3,000 a month and a personal guarantee and a credit check. And he said all of that quickly, the way you do when you are trying to make someone go away. And I did not go away. I sat down at the little folding table in that empty, grease-smelling kitchen, and I opened my green ledger, and I said, "Mr. Petrakis, before you decide I can't afford this, let me show you something." And I turned the ledger around and walked him through it. 3 years, line by line, every month a little bigger than the last, every invoice paid, every crew renewed. And I showed him my account balance at the credit union. And I told him my clients by name, Otis Freeman, the machine shop, the general contractor I had just signed. And I watched the skepticism drain out of his face the way water drains out of a sink. He went quiet. He turned a few pages back and forth. And then he looked up at me over his glasses and said, with a small, rueful laugh, "Mrs. Hayes, I have had 3 tenants in this space in 5 years, and not one of them had books like these. Forget the personal guarantee. When can you move in?" I signed the lease in my own name. Eleanor Grace Hayes, doing business as Pearl's Table. I put down the deposit out of the credit union account. And the day the keys went into my hand, I walked to the center of that big, empty kitchen with its high ceilings and its smell of old grease and bleach. And I cried exactly one time, the way I do, one tear, and then I got to work measuring for shelves. Marcus and I were still living in the same house. That is a thing nobody warns you about. A divorce does not move at the speed of your feelings. It moves at the speed of lawyers and courts. And for months he slept down the hall in Andre's old room, and I slept in the bed I had shared with him for 34 years. And we passed in the kitchen like strangers at a bus stop. There was a morning in that strange, in-between time that tells you everything about how blind he had made himself. I came in at noon from the commissary, having been up since 4, having sent 400 lunches out the door, having signed a new contract that very morning, and I was still in my work clothes with flour on my sleeve, and Marcus was at the kitchen table with his coffee and the paper. And he looked up at me and looked me over. The flour, the tiredness, the keys in my hand. And he said, with that little smile, "Still plain restaurant? You know, when this is final, you're going to have to get serious about how you'll support yourself. Maybe one of your church friends can help you find something part-time." And I stood there in my own kitchen, having just out-earned his month in a morning. And I studied this man, who could not see the woman in front of him if she stood in the noon light with the evidence on her sleeve. And I said, "Only I'll manage, Marcus." And I went upstairs to change. And I almost felt sorry for him. Because a man that blind is going to walk off a great many cliffs, and I was no longer going to be there to catch him. He thought I was being stubborn about the house. He thought I was holding out for a better number. He had no idea I left every morning at 4:30 and drove to a commercial kitchen by the river and built, brick by brick, the thing that was going to make his whole settlement look like pocket change. He never asked where I went. 34 years of not looking is a hard habit to break. He nearly caught it once, all the same. A neighbor mentioned to him, over the fence, that she had seen a green van with my company's name on it, parked at the big commissary by the river. And that evening, Marcus said, frowning over his paper, "Mrs. Dunlap says she saw a van with your little catering name on it down by the river. You're not renting some expensive space, are you?" That would be foolish, Eleanor, at your age, with no income coming after the divorce. And I looked at him, and I made my voice small and reassuring, the voice he expected, and I said, "It's just a borrowed corner of someone else's kitchen, Marcus. Nothing to worry about." And he nodded, satisfied, and went back to his paper. Because the lie fit his picture, and the truth never would have. And I went up to bed thinking that I had become, in the last months of my marriage, a woman who could look her husband in the eye and protect a multi-million-dollar company from him with one mild sentence, and that the very contempt that had caged me for 34 years had become the lock on the door that kept my new life safe. Renata laughed when I told her the next morning. She said, "Mrs. Hayes, that man is going to fall over when this all comes out." And I said, "No, baby, he's not going to fall over. He's going to keep standing there explaining why it never happened." That's worse. I hired a second cook, and I want to tell you how, because hiring Calvin was the day I understood I was running something real. I had put a small ad out for a line cook, and a tall, stooped man in his late 50s came to the commissary with a folder of references, and his hands shook a little when he gave them to me. Not from nerves, I learned, but from the long humiliation of looking for work at his age. His name was Calvin, and he had run the kitchen at a regional hospital for 19 years, 300 meals a service, special diets, no margin for error. And then the hospital had been bought, and the new owners had brought in a contract food company and let him go at 58 with a handshake and a coffee mug. He told me this plainly, not asking for pity. And at the end, he said, Ma'am, I'll be honest. I've had 9 interviews, and they all take one look at my gray hair and find a reason. I can outwork anyone you'll meet. I just need somebody to let me prove it. And I looked at this man, who had been thrown away for being old by people who could not see what was right in front of them. And I felt something I cannot describe, except to call it recognition. I said, Calvin. I got told I was nothing at 61 by somebody who should have known better. I know exactly what your gray hair has cost you. Be here Monday at 5. And he started to thank me, and his voice broke. And I pretended to look for something in a drawer to give him a moment. And Calvin worked for me from that day. And he could feed 300 people without raising his voice. And within a year, he was my kitchen manager. And I have never made a better hire in my life. I hired 2 drivers. I bought a second-hand refrigerated van and had Pearl's table painted on the side in deep green, my grandmother's name rolling down the streets of a city that had never heard it. I learned to read a profit and loss statement. And then I learned to read it well. And then I learned to make it say what I wanted by the choices I made on a Monday. I was 61, and I was learning faster than I had since I was 27 in Robideau's kitchen. And I felt, God forgive me for how good it felt, alive. The work found us because the work was good. Otis Freeman's crews led to a general contractor named Del Hutchins, who had 11 sites across the region. And I will never forget the meeting where that contract was won. Because it is the meeting where I stopped being a woman who cooked for crews and became a woman who ran a company. Del had heard about me from Otis, and he called me into his office, a big man behind a big desk, and he was direct. He said, Otis swears by you, but Otis has 40 men. I've got over 411 sites, and they all want to eat at noon, and the last outfit I tried couldn't keep up, and I had men standing around hungry, which cost me more than the food. So tell me straight, can you feed 400 men, hot, on time, at 11 different addresses, every single day? Because if you tell me yes and you can't, you'll bankrupt me and yourself both. And I did not flinch, because by then I knew my own size. I said, Mr. Hutchins, 400 plates is not a question of whether I can cook. It's a question of systems and trucks and people, and I have all 3, or I will have them by the day you need me. Here is how I would do it. And I laid it out for him. The prep schedule, the route sheets, the hot hold times, the way I would stage the food so a man at Site 11 got it as fresh as a man at Site 1. And I had thought it all through on the drive over. And he leaned back and listened. And when I finished, he was quiet. And then he said, You know, I've had 3 vendors in here this month, and every one of them told me how great their food was. You're the first one who told me how the trucks would run. And he stood up and put out his hand and said, Let's try it for 90 days. And 90 days became 4 years and counting. 11 sites is not lunch for 40 men anymore. It is lunch for 400 every day, hot, on time. And you cannot do that out of a garage with a green ledger. You do it with systems. So I built systems. I built prep schedules and route sheets and a little handwritten manual that grew into a binder. I started catering the contractors' corporate functions, their open houses, the ribbon cuttings where the mayor showed up. And at one of those, a woman who ran catering bookings for the convention center tasted my short ribs and walked across the room to find me and said, I need to know who's behind this food, and asked for my card. And I had a card now, deep green, Pearl's table, Eleanor Hayes, owner. There was a morning in there that proved to me, more than any number on Trevon's page ever did, that I was not playing restaurant. It was a Friday, the Dell account. 400 lunches due across 11 sites by noon. And at 5 in the morning, the main convection oven died. Just stopped. Mid-bake. with 300 portions of chicken half-cooked inside it and the clock running. Renata went white. A younger me, the me of all those years spent idle and obedient at home, would have panicked and called everyone and apologized and lost the account, but I was not that woman anymore. I stood in the middle of my kitchen and I felt the old calm come down over me like a clean apron, the Robideau calm, the calm of a line under fire. And I started giving orders. Calvin, fire up the 2 range hoods. We're going to finish this in batches on the flat tops. Renata, call the route drivers. Push every drop 15 minutes, not 30, 15, and tell them why. Contractors forgive honest. They don't forgive silent. You, take the van to the restaurant supply on Front Street the minute they open and rent me a loaner oven. Here's the card. And we did it. Every site got fed. The last drop was 12 minutes late. And I called Del Hutchins myself before he could call me and told him exactly what had happened and exactly how we had fixed it. And the line was quiet a moment. And then Del laughed and said, "Eleanor, my last vendor would have just let my men go hungry and hoped I didn't notice. You called me to tell me you were 12 minutes late after your oven exploded. You've got this account as long as you want it." I hung up the phone, 61 years old, shaking a little from the adrenaline, and I thought, with a kind of wonder, I just saved a company. My company. And nobody gave it to me, and nobody could take it. The woman from the convention center who had asked for my card, her name was Sandra Pruitt, and she called me that very week, and that one call changed the shape of the company. She booked me for a medical association's regional dinner, 600 plates, white tablecloths, a step up from job site lunches into the world of real events. And on the night of it, I was back in my element from the Carlisle, plating at scale, 600 covers going out in waves. And I stood at the pass, calling the line the way Robideau had taught me 34 years before. And when the last dessert went out, Sandra found me and said, "Eleanor, I run bookings for half the venues in this city, and I am going to send you so much business you won't know what to do with it." And she did. She put my name in front of every event planner she knew, and within months Pearl's Table was feeding job sites by day and galas by night. And the green ledger could no longer hold it, and that is when I knew I needed Priya and Trevin and a building with 2 loading docks, though that was still a year off. By the time the divorce had its first real hearing, Pearl's Table had 9 employees and was clearing in a month what Marcus made in 3. He still did not know. Now, you might ask how a man lives in the same house as a woman building a company and never notices. I have thought about that a great deal, and I think the answer is the saddest part of the whole story, sadder than the cruelty. Marcus did not notice because Marcus had never, not once in 34 years, believed there was anything in me worth noticing. You cannot discover what you have decided in advance does not exist. He had built a wall in his own mind with my name on the wrong side of it. And he lived so comfortably behind that wall that he never thought to look over. But Andre noticed. My son noticed. And I have to tell you about Andre, because his turn is the part of this story I hold closest. Andre called me the way grown sons call their mothers, every couple of weeks, dutiful, a little distracted, a child in the background, his wife Camille's voice somewhere in the room. When the divorce started, Marcus called him first, and Marcus told it his way. And so for a while my son spoke to me in the careful, pitying voice you use with someone who has been left. "Mom, are you eating? Mom, do you have enough? Mom, Dad says you're being difficult about the house. Please just let the lawyers handle it. You don't need the stress. You don't need the stress." As if I were a woman whose great danger was a strong feeling. There was one call in particular that tested me. Andre phoned on a Sunday evening, and I'd been up since 4, had run a 600-plate gala the night before, and a full job site morning that day. And I was tired in the good way. And he said, "Mom, I talked to Dad. He says you're refusing to sign anything and dragging this out, and honestly, I'm worried about you. You don't have any income, and the legal fees must be eating you alive. Camille and I talked, and we can send you some money each month, just until you get back on your feet. There's no shame in it." And I sat in my test kitchen, surrounded by the company that out-earned his father, my own son offering me an allowance out of pity, and the temptation to tell him everything in one sentence was so strong I had to close my eyes. But I did not. I have a hard streak in me, and it told me that a son who had decided his mother was a fragile, retired housewife needed to discover the truth standing in front of it, with his own eyes, not have it argued at him down a phone line where his father's version could still whisper underneath. So I said, "Only, that's kind of you, baby. But I'm all right. I promise you, I'm all right. Keep your money for my granddaughter." And he sighed, the worried sigh of a good son who thinks his mother is being proud. And I let him think it. For months, I let my own son believe I was the smaller person in my marriage, because I trusted that the truth would arrive louder than anything I could say. And it would. It was sitting in a building by the river with my grandmother's name on the door. Waiting for the morning, I would ask him to stop the car. The first crack came when Andre flew in for a hearing. He came, he said, to support me. But I knew he had come to make sure I did not embarrass the family in court, because that was the worry his father had planted. He picked me up to drive me to a Daisy's office for a prep meeting, and on the way, I asked him to stop at the kitchen by the river. I told him I needed to grab something. I had planned it. I will admit that. I am not above arranging for the truth to be standing in a particular spot at a particular time. We pulled up to the commissary at 11 in the morning, the busiest hour, and I had timed it for exactly that. And the loading dock was rolled up, and 2 of my drivers were wheeling racks of hot pans into the refrigerated van. And Calvin was at the dock door, reading off a route in his calm, flat voice, sight by sight. And Renata was checking pans against a clipboard and calling back the counts. And over the door, in deep green letters 3 feet tall, was the name Pearl's Table. And the whole place was moving like a ship under sail. And it was all mine. Andre stopped the car in the middle of the lot. He did not pull into a space. He just stopped, with the engine running, and he stared. He looked at the sign. He looked at the green van with Pearl's Table lettered down the side. He looked through the open dock at the 9 people working in there. The steam, the steel, the racks, the big chalked order board on the wall with 41 drop-offs listed for that single day. And his mouth opened and closed. And he turned to me very slowly, and his voice came out wrong. Smaller than his grown man's voice, almost a boy's voice. He said, "Mom, what is this?" "This is my work," I said. He got out of the car. He walked into the middle of my kitchen and stood there exactly where I had stood and cried. And his face did a thing I will keep for the rest of my life. It went from confusion to something opening, like a window thrown up in a stale room. Renata waved at me and called, "Morning, Mrs. Hayes, that the Dell order's running early." Calvin nodded. A driver asked me to sign a sheet, and I signed it, Eleanor Hayes, owner, while my son watched. "How long?" Andre said. His voice had gone rough. "A while," I said. "It started small. It's not small anymore. Does Dad know?" "No," I said. "Your father thinks I cook for a couple of work crews. He doesn't know any of this. He told me, the morning he handed me the papers, that I'd be nothing without him. Andre stood in my loud, beautiful kitchen with the smell of 40 pounds of short ribs in the air and the van engine turning over outside, and his eyes filled. And he said, very quietly, the thing I had waited months without knowing I was waiting for. He said, "He has no idea who you are." He never did. That was the beginning of my son coming home to me. Not to the house, to me. I did not gloat to Andre. I want you to notice that, because it matters later. I did not say, "I told you so," because I had never told him so. I had let him find it. I put my hand on his arm and I said, "I'm all right, baby. I've been all right a long time. I just stopped waiting for somebody to say so." And he hugged me there on the floor of that loud kitchen with a clipboard still in his hand. And Renata pretended very hard to be counting pans. The divorce ground on. Adizi's full disclosure demand had detonated quietly on Marcus's side. He had expected me to roll over, sign by the colored tabs, take my kitchen things, and disappear. And instead his lawyer received a formal request for complete financial discovery. Every account, every property, every income source, 3 years back. Marcus was furious. He thought I had hired a shark to squeeze him for alimony out of spite. He raged about it to Andre, and Andre told me about it much later, and I will tell it the way Andre told me, because it is the moment my son's loyalty turned without my asking for it. Marcus had called Andre the way he always called Andre first, and he had said, "Your mother's lost her mind. She's got some lawyer demanding every financial record I own, going back years, like I'm a criminal, after everything I gave that woman." And Andre, who at that point still half believed his father's version of things, had said carefully, "Dad, why would she need 3 years of records for a simple divorce?" And there had been a silence on the line, Andre said. A silence that went on a beat too long. And in that silence, my son said he felt the first cold finger of doubt because his father, who always had an answer, did not have one. Marcus finally said, "How should I know? She's being vindictive." And Andre said nothing and let his father rage on and hung up the phone with a question in his chest that would not leave, which is a particular kind of loyalty. The loyalty of a son who decides to wait for the truth instead of taking the easy story. And I did not expect it of him, and I have never forgotten it. What discovery turned up on Marcus's side is a story I am not proud to enjoy, so I will tell it plainly. Adais called me in one afternoon and asked me to sit down, and she had a way of asking you to sit down that told you the floor was about to move. She had 3 folders squared up on her desk, and she opened the first one and turned it toward me and said, "Mrs. Hayes, I need to show you what came back in discovery, and I want you to take a breath, because some of it is going to hurt. The Atlanta sales conferences," she said, "were not entirely sales conferences. There was a woman. Her name does not matter, and I will not give it the dignity of being in my story." Adayezi laid out the records, hotel folios, dinners for 2, a piece of jewelry from a store I had never set foot in that cost more than my first car, 3 years of it, in a city I had been told was all conference rooms and rubber chicken, and that I had never once been invited to share. I looked at the dates. I am ashamed to tell you the first thing I felt was not betrayal, but a strange cold clarity, because some of those dates were the very weekends he had come home and told me he was too tired from the work to come to church with me. And now I knew what the work had been. And then Adais opened the second folder, and she said, "There's something else?" And this one surprised even me. "Your husband, Mrs. Hayes, who I understand lectured you for years about not looking like you needed money, took a second mortgage out on the house." And she slid the document across, and there it was. The deed I had been told was his, encumbered with a loan I had never signed for and never known about. 60-some thousand dollars borrowed against the home I had cleaned and cooked in and raised a son in for 34 years. Taken out, the dates made plain. To feed the city I was never invited to. I sat in Adaez's office with the 3 open folders in front of me. The girlfriend, the card, the mortgage. 3 years of a secret life laid out in receipts. And Adaeze watched me carefully, the way a good lawyer watches a client absorb a blow, ready with water and tissues. But I did not cry, and I did not rage. I felt, instead, a strange settling, like a house finding its foundation after years of leaning. Because all of it, every folio and charge and secret loan, was the proof of a thing I had felt in my body for years without permission to name. That the man who told me I was worthless had known, somewhere underneath, that I was not, and had needed to keep me small precisely because a woman who knew her own size would not have stayed. The cruelty had not been carelessness, it had been maintenance. He had to keep me believing I was nothing, because the day I stopped believing it was the day his comfortable life ended, and he had been right about that, just not in the way he meant. I closed the folder gently, and I said to Adaeze, "Thank you. I'm all right." I'd actually been wondering where Atlanta really was for about a year. Now I know. Let's talk about what we do with it. He could take that mortgage out, Adaeze explained, because his name alone was on the deed. He had made sure of that 34 years ago, when we bought the place, and he told me there was no reason to put a housewife on the title and complicate the paperwork. And I, 27 and in love, and freshly out of the only job that had ever made me feel like myself, had said all right. His name alone on the deed had felt, for 34 years, like his power over me. And now his name alone on the deed meant his name alone on a second mortgage, his name alone on a debt, his name alone on a house that was worth a great deal less than he thought because he had already borrowed the heart out of it. The house he was so proud to keep was a house he had hollowed out himself. I saw him at the courthouse the morning of a status hearing, before any of the disclosures had been laid on the table in front of him. And he was still the old Marcus, still certain. He was standing in the hallway in his good suit, talking to his lawyer. And when he saw me, he came over. And he had the nerve, the genuine nerve, to lean in and say, low, almost kindly, "Eleanor, this doesn't have to be a war. Drop the lawyer, take a small settlement, and we can both walk away with our dignity. I'm trying to help you here." And I looked at this man who did not yet know that his own disclosures were about to come back and tell the whole truth about him. And I felt the strangest tenderness toward his certainty. The way you feel toward a man who does not know he is standing on a trap door. I said, "Only, you've always been trying to help me, Marcus." And I went and sat on my side of the hallway. And Adaeze came and sat beside me with her briefcase. And Marcus watched us. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of something cross his face. The first faint suspicion that the woman he had counted out might have come to the courthouse counting something of her own. I did not laugh. I sat in Adaeze's office while she laid the documents out, and I felt something I can only call sorrow. A deep, tired sorrow for the years. For the boy I had been so happy with at 27. For the man who needed so badly to look rich that he had mortgaged his own home to chase a feeling. Sorrow does not cancel justice, but it sat beside it the whole time, and I am glad it did, because it kept me from becoming what he had always quietly accused me of being able to become, someone small. Here is where the math of it all turned, and I am going to be careful and exact, because this audience knows a contrived ending when it smells one, and there was nothing contrived here. There was only what was true, finely written down. On his list of assets Marcus had the house, the duplex on Calhoun, his retirement account, 2 cars, and the boat. He valued the house high, the way you do when you want the other side to think you are giving something up by keeping it. But the house had the second mortgage against it that he had hoped to keep quiet. And once that came off the top, the equity was a third of what he had claimed. The duplex on Calhoun, it turned out, had a tenant problem and a roof problem and a lien from a contractor he had stiffed. His retirement account was real and substantial. I will not pretend otherwise. 30 years of an insurance man's diligence. And under the law, half of it had been earned during our marriage, and a portion of that was mine. And on my side was Pearl's table. Here was the question that decided everything. The business had grown during the marriage, in my name, with my hands. And under our state's law, a share of its value could be considered marital property, claimable by Marcus, the same way a share of his retirement was claimable by me. Adaiz was honest with me from the first day. He could come after a piece of what I had built. That was the law, and the law does not care that he never lifted a finger. But he could only claim it if he disclosed it. And to disclose it, he would have had to admit, on the record, under oath, that the wife he had sworn was nothing had built a company worth more than his house, his duplex, and his cars combined, while living down the hall from him, and that he had never noticed. And to claim a share of it, he would have had to come to the table having already certified a financial disclosure that hid a girlfriend, a secret credit card, and a second mortgage drawn in secret out of the equity in a marital home. He had filed first because he thought he was the one with something to protect. Before that final negotiation, Adizi sat me down and laid out the choice honestly, because she was that kind of lawyer. And I have always been grateful she did not simply play her cards for me without my eyes open. She said, "Mrs. Hayes, here is where we are, and here are your roads. Road 1, we go to court. We put his hidden card, his girlfriend, his secret second mortgage in front of a judge. Possibly raise the question of fraud on the court for an incomplete sworn disclosure. It would be ugly, it would be public. And given what he did, you would likely come out ahead on the marital balance. But your business comes into the open too. And he gets to make a claim on a share of Pearl's table. And even if he loses most of it, you would spend a year and a great deal of money fighting a man for a piece of the thing you built with your own hands. Road 2. We use what we know not as a sword, but as a wall. We let him keep believing his list is the whole game. We propose that each side simply keeps what is in their own name, his retirement to him, your company to you, his hollow house and its secret debt to him. And we let the fear of what we know about his disclosure keep him from ever reaching for your business. He walks away thinking he won. You walk away with everything you built, free and clear. And you never have to stand in a courtroom and say his girlfriend's name out loud. I sat with that for a moment. And I thought about the kind of woman I wanted to be on the other side of this. And I thought about the applause I did not yet know was coming. And I said, Road 2. I don't want his money, Adaizi. I never did. I want my company clean, and I want to never have to fight him for a single thing I made. Let him keep his story. The story's all he's got, and it's already costing him everything. And Adaisis looked at me for a long moment and said, You know, in 12 years of doing this, I have watched a lot of people choose the sword when the wall would have served them better. You're choosing the wall, and you're choosing it from strength, not fear. I'll get you everything you want. And she did. Adaizi sat across from his lawyer in a conference room I was not in, and she laid it out the way she laid everything out, flat and without heat. Your client swore his disclosure was complete. It was not. We have the card, the loan, the Atlanta charges. We have not yet decided whether the failure to disclose was fraud on the court. Now, our client has a business your client did not list because your client did not know it existed and is, frankly, embarrassed to learn of. Here is what we propose. Each side keeps what is in their own name. He keeps his retirement in full. He keeps the house with its second mortgage, which is his debt and his alone. She keeps Pearl's table in full. No claim either way. He drops the alimony fight. She drops the fraud question. Everyone signs, everyone walks. And your client gets to keep believing whatever he needs to about how it went. His lawyer, Daisy told me later, was quiet for a long moment, and then said the truest thing anyone said in the whole proceeding. He said, he has no idea, does he, what he's losing? And Daisy said, he decided a long time ago there was nothing there to lose. That's why it's gone. Marcus took the deal. Of course he took the deal. The alternative was a courtroom where a judge read aloud the charges from a city he was never invited to share with me, in front of the kind of people whose good opinion was the only God he had ever truly served. He kept his retirement and his hollow house and his stiffed duplex, and he signed away any claim to a company whose true size he did not yet understand, because understanding it would have cost him the one thing he could not afford to spend: his story about himself. The day the decree was final, I did not celebrate. I went to the kitchen by the river at 4:30 in the morning, the way I did every morning, and I made cinnamon rolls, the kind I had made the morning my marriage ended, the kind I had made for 34 years for free, and I ate one warm at my own steel counter in my own building, Pearl's name lettered on the door, and it was the best thing I have ever tasted. And I was not nothing. I would like to tell you the story ends there, with a quiet woman and a warm roll and a wicked man getting his hollow house. But it does not end there, because Marcus, like a great many men who have built their whole worth on a story, could not leave the story alone once the world began to tell it differently. And the world did begin to tell it differently, because Pearl's table did not stop growing the day my divorce was final. It accelerated. Within a year of the decree, I had moved out of the house entirely, into a small, bright condominium downtown with a kitchen I cooked in only for joy. And Pearl's table had 18 employees and 3 vans, and a contract to provide the daily food service for 2 of the largest construction firms in the region. I had hired an operations manager, a brisk, competent woman named Priya, who had run logistics for a regional grocery chain, and who walked into my commissary, looked at my handwritten route sheets and my chalkboard, and said, with great respect, "Mrs. Hayes, your food is extraordinary, and your systems are held together with prayer and a marker. Let me build you the real thing." And she did. And I hired a young accountant fresh out of school named Trevin, earnest and sharp, who took one look at my green ledger and the shoebox of receipts beside it and said gently, "Ma'am, you built a real company in a notebook." And then he built me the kind of reports I had once squinted at by hand. And the first time he showed me a clean projection of where we would be in a year, a single page with a line climbing the way a line should climb. I had to set it down and look out the window for a moment, because the number at the end of that line was larger than every dollar Marcus's name had ever been on, combined, and I had made it out of cinnamon and 4 o'clock mornings and a refusal to keep asking permission. We had outgrown the commissary by the river, and the day I went to tell Mr. Petrakis I would be leaving, he shook my hand and said, "I knew the day you showed me that notebook you'd outgrow this place." And I signed a lease on a real production facility out by the interstate. 14,000 square feet, 2 loading docks, a test kitchen where I developed new menus the way I had once developed desserts for Robidoux, with my whole attention in my best hands. The numbers by then were not the numbers of a hobby, and they were not the numbers of a small business either. One evening, Trevon came into the test kitchen with his tablet and turned it to face me, the way Marcus had once turned the divorce folder to face me across a table. Except what was on this screen was a single clean line on a growth chart. 3 years of Pearl's table climbing the page. And at the top, in plain figures, the percentage we had grown since the year I leased the commissary. And it was a number so large, I asked him to check it twice. He checked it twice. The line went up, and I thought of the green ledger in the proofing cabinet where it all started, the 4 o'clock arithmetic by lamplight, and how that whole notebook now fit inside the first inch of this rising line. We were on track to clear, in a single year, more than Marcus would earn in the rest of his working life. The thing he said I would be nothing without him had grown in the time it took our divorce to finalize and the year after, into something that dwarfed everything his name had ever been on. And I had done it the boring way, the only way it is ever really done, by getting up before the sun and feeding people well and reinvesting every dollar and never once mistaking looking rich for being useful. Andre watched all of it. He had moved past pity and into something I treasure more, a son's open pride. He called more often now, and the calls were different. There was one I keep. It was a weeknight, late, and I was in the test kitchen, and he called. And I could hear in his voice he had been thinking. He said, "Mom, I have to tell you something, and I need you to just let me say it. I spent my whole life thinking Dad was the strong one, and you were the one who needed taking care of. And it was backwards. It was completely backwards. You were holding all of it up the whole time, and he was standing on top of you telling everyone how tall he was. And I sat down on a stool in my quiet kitchen and let my son say it, because he needed to say it more than I needed to be spared the years it named. And then he said, half laughing to keep from crying, 'You know what you've built is worth real money, right? You should think about the long-term succession, what happens to it someday.' And I said, 'I know, baby. I think about it every day. I named it after your great-great-grandmother, Pearl. I intend for it to outlive me.' And the line went quiet, a long quiet. And then he said, very quietly, 'I'd be honored to be a part of that someday, if you'd ever want me.' And I had to put my hand over my mouth, because that was a sentence I had stopped letting myself hope to hear. The sound of my son asking to stand beside the work instead of inheriting the lie. Camille, his wife, started calling too. And the first time she called on her own, without Andre, she said, 'Mom, Andre told me everything, what his father said to you and what you built. And I had to tell you myself. You are the strongest woman I have ever heard of, and our daughter is going to grow up knowing exactly who her grandmother is.' And she started sending pictures of the grandbaby, a fat-cheeked little girl, every few days. And there was a warmth coming back into the family that I had thought the divorce would burn down. And instead, it was the divorce that cleared the ground for it. Because once the lie about who I was fell down, there was finally room for the truth to grow something. Marcus, meanwhile, was struggling, and the worse it got, the louder he got about it. The hollow house caught up with him first. The second mortgage he had taken out to chase Atlanta was still there. 2 payments now where he had counted on 1. And his income was not what it had been, because an insurance man in his 60s whose firm is being bought by a larger firm is not a man whose commissions are climbing. The new owners brought in younger agents and a new comp plan. And Marcus, who had coasted for years on relationships and a good suit, found the ground tilting under him at exactly the age when a man can least afford it. He fell behind on the house. I heard about it the way he used to hear about me, sideways, through people. A deacon's wife who mentioned that she had seen Marcus at the bank looking gray. A cousin who said Marcus had asked to borrow against a life insurance policy. He tried to sell the duplex on Calhoun to free up cash, and discovered what discovery had already shown me a year before. That the duplex he had once listed proudly as an asset was a stone around his neck, with a contractor's lien he had earned by stiffing the man, a roof that needed $20,000, and a tenant who had stopped paying 4 months back and knew exactly how long the eviction process takes in this state and intended to use every day of it. He sold it eventually, for far less than he had once written on his asset list, to an investor who smelled the desperation, and the money went straight to the bank. And Marcus, who had spent 34 years terrified of looking like a man who needed money, had become, in plain sight of the whole town, a man who needed money. And then one day, about 18 months after the decree, my phone rang. And it was Marcus, and I almost did not recognize his voice, because the salesman's shine was gone from it. "Eleanor," he said, "we need to talk." I was in my test kitchen developing a new cornbread for a school district contract, and I set down my spoon and I said, "About what, Marcus?" He cleared his throat. He said he had heard from people that my catering thing had done well. He said it like that. My catering thing. Even then, even with his hand out, he could not quite let it be a company. He said times were hard for him. The firm's sale had not gone the way he hoped. The house was under water, and there was a long pause. And I let it sit, because I had learned from him, of all people, that the one who fills the silence loses the deal. And finally he said, in a voice trying very hard to sound casual, that he had been thinking, given everything, given how long we were married, given that a lot of those early years he had supported me, put a roof over my head while I, found myself, that maybe I might consider helping him out. "Alone," he said quickly, "just to get over this rough patch, or, whatever felt right. Family is family. Family is family." I turned that one over while the cornbread cooled. Family is family, from the man who had told me at 61 that I was nothing, who had borrowed against our home to fund another woman in a city I was never invited to, who had let our son believe his whole life that his mother was the soft furniture of the house. Family is family, now that the family had something he needed. I want to be honest about what I felt, standing in my test kitchen with cornbread cooling on the rack. I did not feel triumph. I have never, in this whole story, felt the clean, hot triumph that people imagine I must have felt. What I felt was tired and sad, and underneath it, very far down, a small, steady flame of something that was not cruelty, but was its dignified cousin. I felt the right to say no. "Marcus," I said, "you told me, the morning you handed me the divorce papers, that at 61 I had no skills, no name, and nothing, and that I'd be nothing without you. Do you remember saying that?" There was a silence. "I don't," he said, which was a lie, and we both knew it. "You did," I said. "You said it across the kitchen table while you slid the papers at me. And then you told me to keep my kitchen things." "Eleanor, that was a hard day for both of us," he started. "It was," I said. "It was the best day of my life, and I didn't know it yet. So here's my answer. The catering thing, as you call it, is called Pearl's Table, after my grandmother, whose name you never once asked me about in 34 years. It is a company. It is mine. I built it with the hands you told me to fold in my lap. And I am not going to lend you money, Marcus. Not because I want you to suffer. I don't. But because the kindest thing I can do for you, the only honest thing, is to let you find out what it's like to be on your own, with nothing but yourself, the way you told me I'd be. You said I'd be nothing without you. It turns out you had it backwards. He was quiet. And then, in a small voice I had not heard from him in decades, he said, "Was I really that bad?" And I told him the truth, which was the only gift I had left to give him. I said, "You weren't a monster, Marcus. You were just a man who decided, a long time ago, that the only way to feel big was to make me feel small. And you did it so long that you forgot it was a choice. You started believing your own cruelty was just the way things were. That's not a monster. That's just a sad, ordinary thing that ruins a life. I'm sorry it ruined yours." I hung up gently. I did not slam it. I went back to my cornbread and I tasted it. And it needed a little more honey, and I added it. And that is the truest detail in this entire story. That the day my husband finally asked me for money, what mattered to me was the honey in the cornbread for a school district's children, and not him at all. I thought that was the end of it. It was not quite. There was one more scene, and it is the one people ask me about most. And it is the only one where I had to decide, in front of a crowd, whether I would keep my grace. We held a grand opening for the new production facility out by the interstate. And I want to take you inside that day, because it is the day all of this was for, though not in the way you might think. It was a real event. The mayor came, because two of his biggest employers were my clients, and a politician goes where the contractors go. The local business association came, the same association that, 3 years before, would not have known my name. A reporter from the regional paper came. A sharp young woman with a recorder and a photographer. Because a woman who started a company in her garage at 58 and built it into a multi-million-dollar food service operation by 63 is the kind of story that sells papers. Especially when the woman is a grandmother with silver in her curls who still gets to the kitchen before the sun. She had interviewed me the week before, and she had asked me near the end, leaning in, "So, what would you say to the people who counted you out?" And I had thought of Marcus, and I had said, "Only, I'd say thank you. Being counted out is the most freeing thing that ever happened to me." And I watched her write that down and underline it. We set the test kitchen up for tours and laid a long table by the loading docks with everything that had built the company, the cobblers, the short ribs, the cornbread, the yeast rolls. And Calvin and Renata and the whole crew were there in clean aprons, proud, and Priya had a clipboard, of course. And Trevon wore a tie that did not quite fit. And it was, I realized, looking around at all of them, a family I had built, every one of them someone the world had passed over at some point. Hired by a woman the world had passed over. And together we fed thousands of people every single day. I wore a deep royal blue suit that day, tailored, over an emerald green silk blouse, my grandmother's pearl earrings, a fine gold chain Andre had given me for my last birthday. And the wedding band, I will tell you, was finally gone from my hand, and in its place was nothing, and nothing had never felt so light. Andre flew in with Camille and the baby. He stood up at the little podium we had set out by the loading docks, in front of the mayor and the reporters and my 18 employees and a long table of cobblers, and he introduced me. He said, "A lot of people built things in this city. My mother built one with her hands after a man told her she had no skills and no name and would be nothing. He said, 'Her name is Eleanor Hayes, and she's the strongest person I know. And this company is named after her grandmother, Pearl, because she has always known exactly who she comes from, even when nobody else bothered to ask.'" And then he had to stop, because his voice went. and the crowd was clapping. And I stood there in my royal blue suit with one tear on my calm face and let them. And that is when I saw Marcus. He was at the back of the crowd, in a muted gray suit that had once been good and was now a season too old. And he had come, I think, because he could not stay away. Because the story the world was telling about me had finally gotten loud enough to reach even him, and he had to see it with his own eyes to believe it. He stood at the edge of my grand opening, my Hollow House husband, and on his face was an expression I had waited 34 years to see, and took no joy in at all. He looked like a man standing outside a lit window on a dark street, watching a life he could have been inside, and he understood, finally, completely, that he had been the one to lock the door. Andre saw him too. My son's jaw set. He stepped down from the podium and he walked through the crowd toward his father. And I felt the whole moment tip toward something ugly. The kind of public scene that would have given Marcus, in his own twisted accounting, a way to make himself the victim. I started toward them. But Andre got there first, and what he did was not ugly. He stood in front of his father, close, his voice low, just for the two of them, except I was close enough now to hear. He said, "Dad, you can't be here." Marcus said, "I just wanted to see, son. I just wanted to congratulate her." His voice had the old salesman's warmth in it, reaching for the boy he had always been able to reach. And Andre did not reach back. He stood very still in front of his father. This grown man I had raised through 1,003 in the mornings his father took the credit for, and he said, the gentlest hard sentence I have ever heard. "You spent my whole childhood teaching me that she was less than you. I believed you my whole life. I'm not going to believe you for one more minute. This is her day. You need to leave." For a moment, Marcus just looked at his son, and I watched the warmth drain out of his face as he understood that the one relationship he had never thought to worry about, the son he had always had in his pocket, was gone too. Had quietly walked across the room to stand beside his mother, while Marcus was busy not looking. Marcus looked past his son, at me. And the crowd had gone quiet around us the way crowds do, sensing weather. And he said, across the space between us, loud enough now for the people to hear, "Eleanor, was I really that terrible? I could have destroyed him. I want you to know that I knew it in that moment, with the mayor watching and the reporters pen up and 300 people holding their breath. I could have said the city he was never invited to share with me, the secret card, the second mortgage, the girlfriend, the lies, all of it, out loud, on his story's favorite stage, in front of every kind of person whose good opinion was the only thing he had ever lived for. I could have made him nothing, the way he made me nothing, and the crowd would have cheered, and I would have been smaller for the rest of my life. I did not do that. I walked toward him until there was only a few feet between us, the gap I had once measured across a kitchen table, and I said calmly, so that he could hear me, and the front rows could hear me, and nobody behind them needed to. "You weren't terrible, Marcus. You were just a man who started believing his own cruelty was normal, and kept believing it so long that it cost you everything that was ever real in your life. I forgive you. I do. But this is my building, and this is my family, and you gave up your seat at both. Andre's right. You need to go." And he went. He turned, an old man in an old suit, and he walked out through the crowd that parted for him. And nobody jeered, because I had not given them a villain to jeer. I had only given them a boundary, and a boundary does not need an audience to enforce it. The door closed behind him, the big rolling dock door of the building he had said I would never have. and for a moment the whole place was silent. And then the strangest, most beautiful thing happened. The thing I will hold until I die. It started at the back, near the long table, and I think it was Calvin, my kitchen director, who had been thrown away at 58, who put his big hands together first, and then Renata beside him, who had come to me a waitress and a single mother, and then the drivers, and then the whole crowd, the business association and the mayor and the strangers, and it rose up off the concrete floor and filled all 14,000 square feet. They began to clap. Not for his leaving. Not for revenge. There had been none. They clapped, I understood as it rose around me, for the survival of it. For a woman who had been told she was nothing and had, without raising her voice, without ruining a soul, built something true and kept her grace while she did it. They clapped for the part of themselves that hopes that is possible, that hopes the worst thing said about them might one day be a door. Andre put his arm around me, and I felt him shaking, my son, with the weight of a lifetime setting itself down at last. Camille was crying with the baby on her hip. The mayor was clapping. The reporter was clapping with the pen still in her hand, and I saw her mouth the words, "That's the story." And I stood in the middle of a company with my grandmother's name on it, 63 years old, with one tear on a calm face, and I did not wave it away, and I did not make a speech. I just let them. Because some applause you have the right to keep. That was 4 years ago. Pearl's table is bigger now than it was that day, much bigger. We feed schools now, and 2 hospitals, including, and I take a small private joy in this, the very hospital that threw Calvin away at 58, who now buys its food from the company where he is the kitchen director. I've stepped back from the 4 o'clock mornings, mostly, though I still go in some days just to feel a dough. Because a woman should not give up the thing her hands were made for just because she no longer has to do it. Andre left his job 2 states away and came home, and the day he told me, he flew in and took me to dinner, just the 2 of us. And he reached across the table the way his father once had. Except he turned my hands over and looked at the burns and the calluses and the flour worked into the creases. The same hands Marcus had wanted folded in a lap. And Andre held them and said, "Mom, I want to come home and learn this. Not to take it, to earn it. Will you teach me?" And I said yes through tears, in a restaurant, while a whole room pretended not to watch. The way they once clapped when his father proposed in a room just like it. Except this time, the joy was real, all the way down. He runs the operations side now, and he is good at it, careful and warm. And Priya is teaching him the systems, and Trevon is teaching him the numbers, and I am teaching him the only thing that matters, which is to feed people like they are worth feeding well. And the baby is a little girl who likes to sit on a stool in my test kitchen and press her small hands into the dough. And she has my grandmother's name. I am proud to tell you, Pearl, the 4th Pearl in a line of women whose hands were made for this. And some afternoons, I stand behind her at the counter with my hands over her hands, showing her the give of a good dough, the way Pearl Mabry once stood behind me, and I think, this is the empire he said I would never have. Not the buildings, not the contracts. This, a small girl with my grandmother's name and my grandmother's hands, learning that her worth was never anybody's, to give or take. Marcus lost the Hollow House the year after my grand opening. I heard it from people, the way he had once heard about me from people. And there is no triumph in the hearing, only a kind of old sorrow with the edges worn smooth. He lives in an apartment now, a small one across town, and his health is not what it was. Andre sees him sometimes, out of a son's duty and his own good heart, and he tells me only the gentle parts. But once he came back from a visit quiet, and he sat in my kitchen and finally said, "He asked about you, Mom. He asked if you were happy." And I said, "What did you tell him?" And Andre said, "I told him you were the happiest I'd ever seen you." And he just nodded and looked out the window for a long time. And then Andre said the thing that closed the book for me. He said, "I think he finally understands what he had. Not the company. You. I think he understands he had you. And he spent his whole life trying to make you smaller because your size scared him. And now you're the biggest thing in the city. And he's a man in a one-bedroom who wonders if you're happy. I do not hate him. I have looked very hard inside myself for the hatred everyone seems to expect. And it simply is not there. There is only the memory of a girl of 27 with the best hands a hard old Frenchman had seen in 20 years. And a great deal of gratitude that she got them back before it was too late. I want to say one true thing to you. And then I will let you go. For 34 years, I believed the most important question about my life was whether the man across the table thought I was worth something. I arranged my whole self around his answer. And the morning he finally gave me his honest answer, that I was nothing, was the morning I was set free. Because once the worst thing has been said out loud, it loses its power to be a threat, and you are finally allowed to find out for yourself how wrong it was. Your value is not a verdict that other people get to deliver. It was never theirs to deliver. It was yours to discover, the whole time, and the only thing standing between you and the discovering was your willingness to stop waiting for permission. So if there is a man, or a child, or anyone at all in your life who has decided in advance that there is nothing in you worth seeing, I want you to remember a 61-year-old woman piping icing onto a warm roll with a steady hand the morning her marriage ended, who already knew, somewhere under all that quiet, that she was about to find out how big she really was. You can be that woman. You probably already are. You may just be waiting for someone to say so. And I am here, in your part of the world, on whatever evening this finds you, to be the one who says it. You are not nothing. You never were. If this story touched your heart tonight, I would love for you to sit with me a moment longer before you go. I want to ask you something, the way I asked at the beginning. And I want you to answer me down in the comments, because I read them, and they are the guest book of this little gathering we have here. Have you ever experienced betrayal, or forgiveness, or a hard-won second chance in your own family? The kind that changed who you understood yourself to be? Tell me. Tell me whether you found, like I did, that the worst thing someone ever said about you turned out to be the door instead of the wall. And do me one kindness. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Because I like to imagine all of you out there, in your kitchens and your living rooms and your quiet late hours, in cities I will never see. And to know that we were together for a little while tonight, across all that distance. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to like it, so it can find another woman who needs to hear it, and subscribe and stay with me, because there is always another story, and I will always tell it true. Your value is not determined by the people who fail to see it. It never was. It is determined by the one who made your hands, and by the quiet, faithful work those hands were always meant to do. Mine was bread. I wonder what yours is. Go and find out. I will be right here, waiting to hear all about it.